Trump administration hardens its attack on climate science. Washington. New President Trump has rolled back environmental regulations, brushed aside dire predictions about the effects of climate change, and turned the term global warming into a punchline rather than a prognosis. Now, after 2 years spent unraveling the policies of his predecessors, Mr. Trump and his political appointees are launching a new assault. In the next few months, the White House will complete the rollback of the most significant federal effort to curb greenhouse gas emissions, initiated during the Obama administration. It will expand its end, in what could be Mr. Trump's most consequential action yet. His administration will seek to undermine the very science on which climate change policy rests. Mr. Trump is less an ideologue than an armchair naysayer about climate change, according to people who know him. He came into office. As a result, parts of the federal government will no longer fulfill what scientists say is one of the most urgent jobs of climate science studies, reporting on the future effects of a rapidly warming planet and presenting a picture of what the Earth could look like by the end of the century if the global economy continues to emit heat-trapping, carbon dioxide pollution from burning fossil fuels. The attack on science is underway throughout the government. In the most recent, scientists say that it would give a misleading picture because the biggest effects of current emissions will be felt after 2040. Models show that the administration's prime target has been produced by an interagency task force roughly every 4 years since 2000. Government scientists' work on the next report, which is expected to be released in 2021 or 2022, has already begun. But from now on, what we have here is a pretty blatant attempt to politicize the science, to push the science in a direction that's consistent with their politics, said Philip B. Duffy, the president of the Woods Hole Research Center, who served on a National Academy of Sciences panel that reviewed the government's most recent national climate assessment. It reminds me of, in an email, James Hewitt, a spokesman for the Environmental Protection Agency, defended the proposed changes. The previous use of inaccurate modeling that focuses on worst-case emissions scenarios, that does not reflect real-world conditions, needs to be thoroughly re-examined and tested if such information is going to serve as the scientific foundation of nationwide decision-making now and in the future, Mr. Hewitt said. However, the goal of political appointees in the Trump administration is not just to change the climate assessment's methodology, which has broad scientific consensus, but also to question its conclusions by creating a new climate review panel. That effort is led. The demonization of carbon dioxide is just like the demonization of the poor Jews under Hitler, said the physicist, who serves on the National Security Council as the president's deputy assistant for emerging technologies. Mr. Happer's proposed panel is backed by John R. Bolton, the president's national security advisor, who brought Mr. Happer into the NSC after an earlier effort to recruit him during the transition. Mr. Happer and Mr. Bolton are both beneficiaries of Robert and Rebecca Mercer, the far-right billionaire and his daughter, who have funded efforts to debunk climate science. The Mercers gave money. Climate scientists are dismissive of Mr. Happer. His former colleague, even Stephen K. Bannon, the former White House strategist who views Mr. Happer as the climate hustler's worst nightmare, a world-class physicist from the nation's leading institution of advanced learning, who does not suffer fools gladly, is apprehensive about what Mr. Happer is trying to do. The very idea will start a holy war on cable before 2020, he said. Better to win now. But at a White House meeting on May 1st, at which the skeptical advisors made their case, Mr. Trump appeared unpersuaded. People familiar with the meeting said, "Mr. Happer, the concept is not new. Mr. Trump has, at the time, been the White House chief of staff. But since for Mr. Trump, climate change is often the subject of mockery. Wouldn't be bad to have." His views are influenced mainly by friends and donors like Carl Icahn, the New York investor who owns oil refineries, and the oil and gas billionaire Harold Hamm, both of whom pushed Mr. Trump to deregulate the energy industry. Mr. Trump's daughter Ivanka made a well-publicized effort. But after being banned, the president's advisors amplify his disregard. At the meeting of the that is one of the most crude messages one could deliver, said R. Nicholas Burns, who served as the NATO ambassador under George W. Bush. At the National Security Council, under Mr. Bolton, officials said they had been instructed to strip references to global warming from speeches and other formal statements. But such political... Mr. Riley, the head of the Geological Survey, who does not have a background in climate change science, characterized the changes as an attempt to prepare more careful, accurate reports. We're looking for answers, yet scientists said that by eliminating the projected effects of increased carbon dioxide pollution after 2040, the Geological Survey reports would present an incomplete and falsely optimistic picture of the impact of continuing to burn unlimited amounts of coal, oil, and gasoline. The scenarios in these reports that show different outcomes are like going to the doctor, who tells you, if you don't change your bad eating habits, and you don't start to exercise, you'll need a quadruple bypass, but if you do change your lifestyle, you'll have a different outcome, said Catherine Hayhoe, the director of the Climate Science Center at Texas Tech University and an author of the National Climate Assessment. Not all government science agencies are planning such changes. A spokesman for the push to alter the results of at least some climate science reports, several officials said, came after November's release of the second volume of the National Climate Assessment. While the Trump administration did not try to rewrite the scientific conclusions of the report, officials sought to play it down and discredit it, with a White House statement calling it largely based on the most extreme scenario. Still, the report could create legal problems for Mr. Trump's agenda of abolishing regulations. This summer, the opponents say that when they challenge the moves in court, they intend to point to the climate assessment, asking how the government can justify the reversals when its own agencies have concluded that the pollution will be so harmful. That is why officials are now discussing how to influence the conclusions of the next national climate assessment. They've started talking about how they can produce a report that doesn't lead to some silly alarmist predictions about the future, said Myron Ebel, who heads the energy program at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, an industry-funded research organization, and who led the administration's transition at the EPA. A key change, he said, would be to emphasize historic temperatures rather than models of future atmospheric temperatures, and to eliminate the worst-case scenarios of the effect of increased carbon dioxide pollution, sometimes referred to as business-as-usual scenarios, because they imply no efforts to curb emissions. Scientists said that eliminating the worst-case scenario would give a falsely optimistic picture. Nobody in the world, outside the United States, climate scientists had long given up on the White House being anything but an outlier in policy. But they worry about it is very unfortunate and potentially even quite damaging that the Trump administration behaves this way, said Johann Roxer divided by M, the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. There is this arrogant search for location/city.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park.